Kryptonite. I'm sure just seeing the word conjures up an image of Superman in his blue and red uniform with the iconic S on his chest, now unable to move or save the day from his now very weakened and vulnerable state. And rightfully so. None of us want that. None of us want it because we can see that it's bad. We've been taught that it's bad. But what if in those moments when we feel as if we're at our most powerless, that we're actually at our most powerful? What if in those moments when we are unable to save anybody else's day, that we're in the best possible position to save our own? I believe that. I believe that our vulnerabilities and our weaknesses are places that we can learn from and not conditions that we have to loathe or avoid. I'll give you something to cry about. I have some really vivid memories of a much smaller me being told by older individuals that they would give me something to cry about. And I couldn't help but think in those moments that clearly I must have something to cry about, as evidenced by the tears running down my face. But you know, whether it's I'll give you something to cry about, or be a big boy or be a big girl, all of those statements, you can call me crazy and feel free to disagree, but I actually don't think that any of those statements were shared in malice. I do believe that they were attempts by those who were older and wiser at the time to give us the strength to survive. As for me, they knew that life at some point would get hard for this little girl from East Texas. And they didn't want her crybaby ways to take her over the edge or for life to victimize her. That's fair. But there's only one problem with that. The problem is that it's not the truth. The truth is that being vulnerable has nothing to do with being a victim. That when we feel weak or if we're crying, that doesn't mean that we're not strong. Again, I say that being vulnerable or being weak or even crying are places that we can learn from. And today, my hope is that we can learn at least 3 things. The first thing that I want us to learn is that being vulnerable or weak can actually make us limitless. When we're younger, we learn that certain behaviors may bring about the possibility of pain. Touching a hot stove, a hot plate, a hot pan. And after about the first 50 times, you get the message. Now, I don't know when we begin to connect being vulnerable to the possibility of pain, but I do know that when we disconnect it, something amazing happens. We become empowered. We stop living a life that is full of limits, and we start living a life where we actually take risk, where we ride roller coasters, where we start the business, or where, my favorite, where we fall in love. Or maybe we fall in love for the first time. See, the beautiful thing about leaning into our vulnerabilities and our weaknesses is that once we decide that being vulnerable is worth the risk, now we've opened up amazing, infinite possibilities to live a life that is limitless. The next thing that we can learn is that when we lean into our weaknesses, they can teach us things about ourselves. Anybody ever had that weakness wake-up call? You know, where one day you're feeling amazing and the next you're not? Don't you love it? Not so much. But the beauty of that weakened condition is that it's going to make you start to figure out what you need to get back into balance. It's going to make you figure out, what do you need to be healthier? What do you need to stop feeling off kilter? What is going to take you back into your sense of normalcy, whether you need to reclaim, redefine, or redesign it? Though we hate it, I have to tell you that weakness wake-up call will teach you things that being on your A game never can. And ultimately, these are lessons that we must learn. The last thing that we can learn is that knowing when to share our vulnerabilities and our weaknesses means that they will not be used against us. Now, this may come as a funny story, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway. I'm an orange belt in karate, or karate, as it's often said. Now, though it was years ago, I loved the study of karate. But there was one thing about the study of karate that I did not love, and that was the possibility of getting hit. So what do you do when you figure out you love karate, but you despise the possibility of getting hit? Well, you figure out that you're stronger on your right side than on your left side. And so when you go to tournaments or to spar, you make sure that you protect your weaker side, your more vulnerable side from your opponent and your enemy so that you can what? Win. And the message here is clear. To avoid defeat, don't let your enemy see your vulnerabilities and your weaknesses. Makes perfect sense to me. You know when it doesn't make sense, though? When we're trying to have healthy, happy, harmonious relationships with people that we actually care about and that we know care about us. But oddly enough, we do the very same things in those relationships too sometimes. We hide our vulnerable side. We're so afraid that our kindness is going to be mistaken for weakness. And God forbid we think about going out on that proverbial limb. You know, I get it. I used to climb trees as a child, and I personally didn't like going out on a limb, mostly because I was a heavy child. See, it's scary out on that limb because you're all alone and you're exposed, and okay, so what if it doesn't hold you? But there's such an amazing thing that happens when we make a decision to go out on a limb for the people that we care about and whom we also know care about us. And the beautiful thing that happens is, spoiler alert, that's going to be where you find the fruit. The fruit is out on a limb, and the fruit is what we all so richly deserve. So maybe it's time for us to rethink how we feel about being vulnerable and being weak. Maybe it's time that we really see these conditions as circumstances that we can learn from, and not weak, terrible conditions that we should avoid. Because at the end of the day, if we can learn to love our kryptonite, then we can learn that what makes us vulnerable also makes us strong. What makes us vulnerable also makes us powerful. What makes us vulnerable also can make us wise. What makes us vulnerable can also make us super. Dare I say, superhuman? But you know, in the words of Brené Brown, what makes you vulnerable absolutely makes you beautiful. Now, I have one more thing to ask of you, and I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that it's a little cheesy, but I hope you'll indulge me none the same. I'd like you to take your arms and wrap them around yourself and give yourself a really big hug. And as you're doing that, keep hugging. I'm going to cordially invite you to not only embrace yourself, but in the most passionate, the most intentional way that you can do it. I cordially invite you to embrace your kryptonite. Thank you.